You're barren. Two words that shattered everything. Lydia Harrow traveled 1,400 miles to become Jonas Caldwell's wife, only to watch him tear up their marriage contract the moment he read her medical letter. Stranded in the Montana wilderness with winter closing in, she accepted his cold offer, temporary teacher to his 3 motherless children, nothing more. But when the youngest whispered, "Will you be our mama?" everything changed. Stay until the end to see how a rejected woman became the heart of a broken family, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Lydia Harrow against the wooden sidewall hard enough to bruise. Dust exploded through the gaps in the leather curtains, coating her already filthy traveling dress with another layer of Montana grit. 23 days of rattling bones, stale bread, and the constant metallic taste of fear at the back of her throat. "Willow Ridge," the driver shouted, his voice rough as sandpaper. "End of the line, miss. Better you than me staying in this godforsaken place." Lydia's gloved hands trembled as she gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned in this world. Through the coach window, she caught her first glimpse of Willow Ridge Station, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the brutal landscape like frightened animals. The Montana sky stretched overhead, gray and merciless, promising snow. This was supposed to be the beginning of her new life. Instead, it felt like the edge of the world. She stepped down from the coach, her legs unsteady after so many days of travel. The wind hit her immediately, cutting through her wool coat as if it were made of paper. December in Montana was nothing like December in Philadelphia. Back home, winter meant carolers and warm parlors. Here, it meant survival. "Mrs. Harrow?" The voice came from behind her, deep and careful. Lydia turned and her breath caught. Jonas Caldwell stood 6 feet away, hat in his hands, looking nothing like the hopeful photograph he'd sent 3 months ago. That man had smiled slightly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. This man looked carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding them, all sharp angles and hard edges, weathered by grief and work, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Mr. Caldwell." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Yes, I'm Lydia Harrow." He nodded once, his gaze sweeping over her with the efficiency of a man assessing livestock. She felt herself being catalogued, too thin, probably, too pale. City soft. Everything a frontier rancher didn't need in a wife. "Journey was long?" he asked, but his tone suggested he didn't particularly care about the answer. 23 days, she said anyway. "The train to Cheyenne, then the stage. The last driver said the roads are closing soon. Snow." "They are." He bent to pick up her trunk, lifting it as if it weighed nothing. His shoulders were broad under his worn coat, his hands scarred and capable. "We should talk before we head to the ranch. There's a room at the station house. Private." Something in his voice made her stomach clench. This wasn't how mail-order marriages began. She'd read the letters from other women, heard the stories. The man was supposed to be nervous but eager, ready to take his bride home immediately. Jonas Caldwell looked like a man preparing for an amputation. The station house was barely warmer than outside. Jonas set her trunk down and gestured to a rough wooden chair. He remained standing, his back to the pot-bellied stove that did almost nothing to heat the space. "I got your last letter," he said finally. "The one you sent from Cheyenne." Lydia's heart dropped into her stomach. The letter. Of course. Dr. Morrison had insisted she tell him before the marriage. "It's only fair to the man," the doctor had said, his voice full of professional sympathy that did nothing to ease her shame. Some men consider children essential to a marriage. She'd written the letter in a Cheyenne hotel room, tears blurring the words. "There was an accident 2 years ago. An infection. The doctors say I cannot have children." "I understand if this changes things," Lydia said quietly, forcing herself to meet his eyes. They were blue-gray, like the winter sky. "I should have told you sooner, before I left Philadelphia." "Yes," Jonas said. "You should have." The words landed like stones. Lydia straightened her spine, calling on every ounce of dignity her mother had taught her. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this stranger who was looking at her like she'd committed fraud. "I'll return east on the next stage," she said. "If you could recommend a hotel where I might stay until roads are closed. Jonas interrupted. Next stage won't come through until spring, assuming the pass is clear at all. The room seemed to tilt. But the driver said... Driver was talking about the main road. That'll stay passable another week, maybe 2. But getting a stage to come back through here? Jonas shook his head. We're too far from the main route. Nobody's going to risk horses and passengers on these roads until April at the earliest. 5 months. She was stranded here for 5 months. Lydia's careful composure finally cracked. She sank into the chair, her carpet bag slipping from her numb fingers. I see. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its hardness. I've got 3 children at the ranch. Mira's 11, Teddy's 8, and Hazel just turned 5. Their mother died 18 months ago. Pneumonia. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered. They need schooling, Jonas continued as if she hadn't spoken. Mira can read well enough, but Teddy struggles, and Hazel doesn't know her letters at all. I'm no teacher. I can barely keep the ranch running and keep them fed and safe. Lydia looked up slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. You said in your letters you were a teacher back in Philadelphia, Jonas said. That true? Yes. I taught at Miss Preston's Academy for Girls. Literature and composition, primarily, but I can teach arithmetic and... Good. You can stay at the ranch through winter. Teach the children. Earn your keep that way. His jaw tightened. Separate room, separate arrangements. Come spring, when the roads open, I'll pay your passage back to Philadelphia, or wherever you want to go. It wasn't a proposal. It was a business arrangement, the kind of cold transaction that made her mother's warnings echo in her head. Men only want one thing from a wife, Lydia. If you cannot give them children, they will cast you aside. But what choice did she have? 5 months in a strange town with no money, no friends, no shelter? Or 5 months as a governess on a ranch, at least warm and fed? I accept, Lydia said quietly. Thank you for your generosity. Jonas's expression didn't change. It's not generosity, it's practical. We leave in an hour. Dress warm. The ride to the ranch takes 3 hours, and the temperature drops fast once the sun goes down. He left her alone in the cold room, and Lydia finally let the tears come. The ranch appeared out of the gathering darkness like something from a fever dream, a sprawling log house with smoke curling from 2 chimneys, surrounded by outbuildings she couldn't identify in the gloom. Fences stretched into the distance, containing shadows that might have been cattle or horses. The wind had picked up during the journey, and Lydia could barely feel her face despite the wool scarf Jonas had wordlessly handed her an hour earlier. Stay close to me, Jonas said as he helped her down from the wagon. His hands were steady on her waist, gone as soon as her feet touched ground. Children don't know you're coming. Didn't want to get their hopes up in case I wasn't suitable. Lydia didn't need him to finish the sentence. The front door burst open before they reached the porch, and 3 small figures tumbled out in a chaos of voices and movement. Papa, you're home. Did you bring supplies? Mrs. Henderson said you might bring peppermints. Teddy pushed me in the mud and Mira wouldn't. Enough. Jonas's single word cut through the noise like a knife. 3 children froze on the porch steps, their eager faces suddenly wary. Inside, all of you. We need to talk. The children retreated, and Lydia got her first clear look at them in the lamplight spilling from the doorway. Mira was tall for 11, all sharp elbows and serious dark eyes, her brown hair pulled back in a braid that had mostly come undone. Teddy was built like his father would be, sturdy and solid, with the same blue-gray eyes and a cowlick that made his hair stick up in the back. Little Hazel clutched a rag doll with one arm missing, her face round and solemn beneath a tangle of honey-colored curls. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. Children, Jonas said once they were all gathered in the front room, this is Miss Harrow. She's come from Philadelphia to be your teacher for the winter. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on Lydia with unnerving intensity. She forced herself to smile, though her face felt frozen from more than just the cold. Hello, she managed. I'm very pleased to meet all of you. Mira's eyes narrowed. You're the lady from the letters, the one Papa was going to marry. The room went silent. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Mira, Jonas said, his voice low and warning. But you're not, are you? Mira continued, her chin lifting in defiance. You're going to be our teacher, Not our mother. That's enough. Jonas's voice cracked like a whip. Miss Harrow is our guest. You will treat her with respect. Yes, Papa. But Mira's eyes remained hostile as she looked at Lydia. Hazel stepped forward suddenly, still clutching her broken doll. Are you going to leave like Mama did? The innocence of the question was devastating. Lydia crouched down, bringing herself to the child's eye level despite the protest of her travel-weary legs. Your mama didn't want to leave you, sweetheart, Lydia said softly. I'm sure she loved you very much. But she's gone, Hazel said matter-of-factly. Everyone goes away. Lydia's throat tightened. I'll be here all winter. I promise I won't leave until the spring. That's not very long, Hazel observed. No, Lydia agreed honestly. It's not. Teddy had been silent through the entire exchange, but now he erupted into a sudden, violent coughing fit that bent him double. Jonas was at his side instantly, one large hand on the boy's back. Easy, son. Easy. Breathe through it. The coughing went on for nearly a minute, wet and rattling, the kind of cough that spoke of things growing in young lungs. When it finally subsided, Teddy's face was red, his eyes watering. I'm fine, he gasped, but Jonas's expression suggested this was a familiar and worrying occurrence. Bed, Jonas said. All of you. It's late. Miss Harrow will be here in the morning, and you can get to know her then. The children filed out with varying degrees of reluctance. Mira shot Lydia one last suspicious look. Teddy avoided her eyes entirely. Only Hazel turned back at the doorway. Good night, Miss Harrow, she said politely, then added in a whisper probably meant to be private but perfectly audible. I hope you stay longer than spring. Then she was gone, leaving Lydia alone with Jonas in the lamplit room. Your son, Lydia said carefully. That cough. Has had it since last winter, Jonas interrupted. Dr. Henderson came out twice, says it's lung weakness, should grow out of it. But his jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Usually worse in the cold. There are treatments, Lydia said. My sister had a similar condition. Steam inhalations, warm compresses, certain herbs. You a doctor now too? The word stung. Lydia straightened, feeling the exhaustion of 23 days of travel finally catching up with her. No, I'm simply offering what I know. Jonas rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking as tired as she felt. I'm sorry, that was uncalled for. It's been a long day. For both of us. He showed her to a small room off the kitchen, probably meant for a hired hand, with barely enough space for a narrow bed and a washstand. But it was clean, and the blankets looked thick and warm. There's water in the pitcher, Jonas said. Gets cold fast, so use it soon if you want to wash. Breakfast is at dawn. Children eat first, then we do chores. Then you can start lessons around 8. Mr. Caldwell, Lydia said, stopping him before he could leave. Thank you for not sending me away. For giving me this chance. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or anger, or grief. It was gone too quickly to identify. Don't thank me yet, he said. Winter here is hard. Spring feels impossible. You might be cursing my name by February. He closed the door behind him, leaving Lydia alone in the strange room that smelled of wood smoke and unfamiliar soap. She sank onto the bed, still wearing her traveling clothes, too exhausted to even remove her boots. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jonas moving through the house, banking fires, checking locks. The sounds of a man who'd learned to do everything alone because he had no choice. Lydia closed her eyes and saw again the way Hazel had looked at her, that desperate hope poorly disguised by a 5-year-old's attempt at casual questioning. I hope you stay longer than spring. What had she gotten herself into? Dawn came too early and too cold. Lydia woke to the sound of someone, Jonas probably, stoking the kitchen fire back to life. Gray light filtered through the small window, and her breath misted in the air. She'd slept in her clothes, her body aching from the bed and the journey and the weight of her new reality. She forced herself up, washed quickly in the ice-cold water, and changed into a fresh dress, sensible gray wool, appropriate for a governess. When she emerged into the kitchen, she found Jonas already dressed, pouring coffee from a battered pot. Children are still sleeping, he said without preamble. You want breakfast? I can prepare it, Lydia offered, if you tell me where things are kept. Jonas gestured vaguely at the cupboards. Oats are in the blue tin, molasses on the shelf. We eat simple here. They worked in awkward silence, Jonas standing by the window with his coffee, Lydia figuring out the rhythm of the stove and the supplies. The porridge was bubbling when small footsteps announced the children's arrival. Hazel appeared first, still in her nightgown, her hair a wild halo around her sleep-soft face. She stopped in the doorway, staring at Lydia with wide eyes, as if she'd forgotten overnight that a stranger now lived in their house. "Good morning," Lydia said gently. "Breakfast is almost ready." "You're still here," Hazel whispered. "I told you I would be." Mira and Teddy arrived moments later, Mira already dressed, Teddy yawning widely. They took their places at the rough wooden table with the ease of routine, and Lydia served them each a bowl of porridge with molasses. "Thank you, Miss Harrow," Hazel said solemnly. Mira said nothing, just picked up her spoon and ate with mechanical efficiency. Teddy stirred his porridge absently, not eating. "Not hungry?" Lydia asked. "Chest hurts," Teddy mumbled. Jonas's head snapped around. "Since when?" "Last night, after the coughing." Teddy's voice was small, ashamed. "It's not bad, Papa. I'm fine." "Let me see." Jonas crossed to his son, pressing careful fingers against the boy's chest, his face tight with worry. "Tender here?" "A little." Lydia watched the interaction, noting how Teddy tried to minimize his discomfort, how Jonas's hands shook slightly despite their gentleness. A father terrified of losing another person he loved. "I'll prepare a chest compress after breakfast," Lydia said quietly. "If that's all right with you, Mr. Caldwell." Jonas met her eyes across the table. She expected him to refuse, to tell her once again that she was overstepping. Instead, he nodded once, curtly. "Appreciate it." After breakfast, the children were dispatched to morning chores, Mira to gather eggs, Hazel to feed the chickens with her father's supervision, Teddy excused due to his chest pain. Lydia found herself alone in the kitchen with the boy, gathering what she needed. "Does it hurt bad?" she asked as she set a pot of water to boil. "Sometimes." Teddy watched her work with cautious curiosity. "How come you know about chest sickness?" "My little sister, Elizabeth. She had weak lungs, too. Mama used to make compresses with chamomile and eucalyptus. It helped." "Did she get better?" Lydia paused, her hands still on the herbs she'd found in Jonas's surprisingly well-stocked pantry. "She did. She's married now, living in Boston, healthy as a horse." It was only a small lie. Elizabeth was indeed healthy now, though she'd stopped speaking to Lydia after the accident, after Lydia had become damaged goods, unsuitable for proper society. Some wounds didn't show on the outside. "I don't want to die like Mama," Teddy said suddenly, his voice very small. Lydia crossed to him immediately, kneeling beside his chair. "You're not going to die, Teddy. You have a cough, that's all. Lots of children get coughs in winter. The compress will help, and the steam, and maybe we'll find some honey for tea. You'll be running around this ranch causing trouble before you know it." "Promise?" She shouldn't. She didn't know. She wasn't a doctor, just a failed bride with some childhood memories of helping her mother. But Teddy's eyes were so desperate, so afraid. "I promise to do everything I can to help you feel better," Lydia said carefully. "How's that?" Teddy considered this, then nodded. "Okay." The compress seemed to help. By the time Jonas returned with the girls, Teddy was breathing easier, some color back in his cheeks. Jonas's eyes found Lydia's across the room, and something passed between them, not quite gratitude, but an easing of hostility. Progress, however small. "Time for lessons," Jonas said. "I cleared the table in the front room. Miss Harrow will need books and slates. They're in the trunk by the window. Mira, you're to help her set up and behave yourself. Understand?" "Yes, Papa." Mira's tone was dutiful, but her eyes remained mutinous. Jonas left to tend to ranch work, and Lydia was alone with the 3 children who would be her entire world for the next 5 months. Teaching the Caldwell children was like trying to tame 3 wild animals with different natures. Mira was brilliant, but stubborn, reading far beyond her age level but refusing to show off, as if intelligence were somehow shameful. Teddy struggled with letters but excelled at numbers, able to calculate feed costs and cattle weights in his head faster than Lydia could with paper. Hazel simply wanted attention, any attention, and would do anything to keep Lydia's eyes on her. "I can write my name," Hazel announced on the second day, showing Lydia a slate covered in shaky letters that spelled Hazel. "That's wonderful," Lydia praised. "You're missing one letter, though. Do you know which one?" Hazel studied her slate seriously. "The wiggly one?" "The E." "Let me show you." Lydia guided the small hand, helping form the letter. "See? Now it says Hazel." "Like the tree," Hazel said. "Exactly like the tree. Your mama must have loved hazel trees." "Papa says she loved anything that grew." Hazel's voice was matter-of-fact, but her fingers tightened on the slate. "She had a garden, big as this room, but it all died when she did." Mira's head snapped up from across the table. "That's enough, Hazel. Mama wouldn't want you talking about sad things." "But it's true. I said enough." The sharpness in Mira's voice made Hazel's lip tremble, and Lydia felt something protective and fierce rise in her chest. "It's all right to talk about your mother," Lydia said gently. "Both the happy things and the sad things. Remembering someone we love isn't wrong, even when it hurts." "You didn't know her," Mira said coldly. "You don't get to talk about what she'd want." "You're right, I didn't know her." Lydia met the girl's hostile gaze steadily. "But I know what it's like to lose someone, and I know that keeping all the hurt inside just makes it worse." "You don't know anything." Mira stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "May I be excused?" It was a dismissal, not a request. Lydia recognized a battle she couldn't win. "Yes, take an hour. Practice your penmanship when you come back." Mira left without another word, and Lydia heard the front door slam moments later. Through the window, she could see the girl running toward the barn, her braid flying behind her. "She's angry all the time now," Teddy offered quietly. "Since Mama died. Papa says to let her be." "Sometimes people need to be angry for a while," Lydia said. "It's part of how they heal." "Are you angry?" Hazel asked with a child's devastating directness. "Papa said you came here to marry him, but then you couldn't. That seems like something to be angry about." Lydia's breath caught, out of the mouths of babes. "I was sad," she admitted, "and maybe a little angry, yes, but your papa was honest with me. That's important. And now I get to be your teacher, which is turning out to be rather wonderful." "Really?" Hazel's face brightened. "You like teaching us?" "Very much." "Even Mira when she's mean?" "Even Mira when she's mean," Lydia smiled. "Especially Mira when she's mean, because it means she's brave enough to show what she's really feeling. That takes courage." Teddy coughed then, a short burst that made him wince and press a hand to his chest. Lydia was at his side immediately. "Steam treatment," she said. "Right now. Hazel, can you be a good helper and fill the kettle?" The afternoon dissolved into the rhythm of care. Steam tents and chest rubs, chamomile tea with precious honey, warm blankets and quiet stories. Teddy fell asleep in the chair by the fire, his breathing finally easy, and Hazel curled up at Lydia's feet with her broken doll. "Can you fix her?" Hazel asked, holding up the toy. Her arm came off. "I can try. Do you have a sewing kit?" They spent the next hour in companionable silence, Lydia carefully reattaching the doll's arm while Hazel watched with intense concentration. The work was meditative, familiar. Back in Philadelphia, she'd spent countless evenings mending her students' things, torn hems and lost buttons and broken toys, small repairs that meant everything to a child. "There," Lydia said finally, holding up the repaired doll. "Good as new." Hazel clutched the doll to her chest, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Miss Harrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you." "You're very welcome, sweetheart." "I wish you were staying forever," Hazel whispered. "I wish you were going to be our real mama." The words landed like a punch to Lydia's sternum. Before she could formulate a response, the front door opened and Jonas entered, stamping snow from his boots. His eyes took in the scene, Teddy sleeping peacefully, Hazel clutching her repaired doll, Lydia with needle and thread still in her hands. "How's the boy?" he asked. "Much better. The steam treatments are helping. He should sleep well tonight." Jonas nodded, something easing in his shoulders. He looked at Hazel. Time to help with supper. Go wash your hands. Hazel scampered off, still holding her doll, and Jonas moved closer to where Lydia sat. In the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the worry that lived permanently in the lines around his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping him, for—" He gestured vaguely at the doll Hazel had carried away. "For being kind to them." "They're good children," Lydia said. "You've raised them well, Mr. Caldwell." Jonas, the word came out rough, as if he wasn't used to offering it. "If you're living in my house, teaching my children, you should call me Jonas." "Lydia," she replied, "since we're being informal." He almost smiled. Almost. "Fair enough, Lydia." The use of her Christian name felt intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. Dangerous. She stood quickly, gathering her sewing things. "I should help with supper." But before she could escape, Mira appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from cold and running. She looked at her father, then at Lydia, then back to her father. "Is she really staying?" Mira asked. "Or is she going to leave as soon as it gets hard? As soon as we start to—" She stopped, pressing her lips together hard. "As soon as you start to what?" Jonas asked gently. "Love her," Mira whispered, "like we loved Mama." The room went absolutely silent. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but Mira's face was fierce, defensive, daring either of them to make fun of her admission. Jonas crouched down, bringing himself to his daughter's eye level. "Miss Harrow made a promise to stay through winter. She's a woman of her word, but come spring she'll go back to her own life. So we need to be careful, Bug. We need to remember this is temporary." "Everything good is temporary," Mira said bitterly. "That's what I learned when Mama died." She ran past them, up the stairs to the sleeping loft, and they heard a door slam. Jonas stood slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. She's usually not so—" "She's grieving," Lydia interrupted softly, "and she's 11 years old and terrified of losing anyone else she might care about. There's nothing to apologize for." Jonas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." Something passed between them then, some acknowledgement of the strangeness of their situation, the complexity of trying to build something functional out of broken expectations. Then Jonas stepped back, the moment passing. "I'll get Mira. We should eat." Supper was quiet, Mira subdued, Teddy still tired from his illness, Hazel chattering enough for all of them about her doll's miraculous recovery. Lydia caught Jonas watching her several times across the table, his expression thoughtful. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Lydia listened to the house settle around her, the creak of floorboards as Jonas checked on the children, the whisper of wind against the windows, the distant call of something wild in the darkness. 5 months, she reminded herself. You're here for 5 months, and then you'll go back east and build some other kind of life. But Hazel's words echoed in the darkness. I wish you were staying forever. And the terrifying part was how much Lydia was starting to wish for the same thing. The days began to blur together in a rhythm that felt both foreign and oddly natural. Wake before dawn, light the fire, prepare breakfast, teach the children, tend to Teddy's cough, break up arguments between Mira and Hazel, make lunch, more lessons, help with afternoon chores, cook supper, clean up, an hour of quiet in the evening before bed, exhausted. Lydia had never worked so hard in her life. Teaching at Miss Preston's Academy had been challenging, yes, but it had also been civilized. There had been other teachers to share the burden, servants to prepare meals, a schedule that made sense. Here, everything bled together, and she was constantly discovering new skills she didn't possess. How to bake bread that didn't come out like a brick, how to keep the fire going overnight, how to get blood stains out of Teddy's shirt after a nosebleed. But the children made it worthwhile. Teddy's cough improved with the steam treatments and the herbs Lydia brewed into bitter tea that he drank without complaining. His reading improved too, slowly, as Lydia worked out that he saw letters backwards sometimes and needed extra patience. He had Jonas's quiet steadiness, his tendency to think before speaking, but also a gentleness his father had buried beneath layers of grief and practicality. Hazel attached herself to Lydia like a barnacle, constantly underfoot, constantly chattering, constantly seeking approval and affection. She was bright as a button, learning her letters quickly, but what she really craved was touch, hair-brushing, hand-holding, lap-sitting, all the small physical comforts of maternal love. And Mira, brilliant, wounded, defensive Mira. She fought Lydia on everything, the lessons, the schedule, the rules. But Lydia began to understand that the fighting itself was a kind of test. Will you stay even when I'm difficult? Will you still care about me even when I'm mean? So Lydia stayed calm through the arguments, firm through the defiance, and gentle when Mira's anger finally crumbled into tears. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into December, during an afternoon lesson on composition. I want you each to write about a person you admire, Lydia instructed. It can be someone you know personally or someone from history. 1 page, in your best handwriting. Teddy wrote about his father, describing the way Jonas could calm a spooked horse with just his voice, how he never complained even when work was hard. Hazel wrote about Lydia herself, in wobbly letters that made Lydia's throat tight. Miss Harrow is nice. She fixed my doll. She makes Teddy better. I admire her. But Mira sat with her slate blank, her pencil clutched so tight her knuckles were white. Can't think of anyone? Lydia asked gently. I can think of someone. Mira's voice was hard. I just don't want to write about her. Your mother? Mira's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. Don't talk about her like you knew her. You're right, I didn't. Lydia pulled a chair close, sitting down so they were eye to eye. But I'd like to know about her, if you want to tell me. Why? The word was almost aggressive. So you can try to be like her. You can't. Nobody can. I'm not trying to replace your mother, Mira. No one could do that. But I am trying to understand you, and understanding where you came from, who taught you to be the smart, strong girl you are. That helps. Mira's lips trembled. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. Papa couldn't stop looking at her, even after they'd been married for years. She knew all the plants, which ones would heal you and which ones would poison you. She could make bread that tasted like heaven, and she sang while she worked, and she never, ever got angry at us, even when we were bad. She sounds wonderful, Lydia said softly. She was perfect. Mira's voice broke. And then she got sick, and Papa brought the doctor, but the doctor was stupid and didn't know anything, and she just got worse and worse. She couldn't breathe at the end. She kept trying to tell us things, important things, but she couldn't get enough air. And then one morning she was just empty, like her soul had left, but her body didn't know it yet. Tears were streaming down Mira's face now, and Lydia couldn't stop herself. She pulled the girl into her arms, and Mira collapsed against her, sobbing in great gasping breaths that shook her whole body. I miss her, Mira wailed. I miss her so much, and it doesn't get better, it just gets worse, because every day there's something else she's missing, and every day I forget something else about her. I can't remember what her voice sounded like anymore. I try to hear it in my head, and I can't. Oh, sweetheart. Lydia held her tighter. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They stayed like that for a long time, Mira crying while Lydia held her, murmuring wordless comfort. Teddy and Hazel watched with wide eyes from across the room, uncertain what to do. Finally, Mira's sobs quieted to hiccups. She pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. I got your dress wet, she mumbled. I don't care about the dress. Mira looked up at her, eyes red-rimmed and searching. Do you promise you won't try to make us forget her? Some people said Papa should remarry quick so we'd forget and not be sad anymore. But I don't want to forget. I would never ask you to forget your mother, Lydia said firmly. She's part of who you are, part of what makes you wonderful. You should remember her every single day and talk about her whenever you want to and love her for the rest of your life. That's not sad. That's beautiful. Mira studied her face for a long moment, then almost shyly. Can I still write about her? For the assignment? I would love that. The page Mira produced was the most beautiful thing Lydia had ever read. 3 pages instead of 1, in careful script, describing Sarah Caldwell in such vivid detail that Lydia felt she knew the woman. By the time she finished reading, there were tears on her own cheeks. This is extraordinary, Mira, she said. Your mother would be so proud of you." For the first time since Lydia had arrived, Mira smiled at her. A real smile, small but genuine. That night, after the children were in bed, Lydia found Jonas on the front porch despite the cold, staring out at the snow-covered valley. "She wrote about her mother today," Lydia said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the wind. "Mira, for a composition assignment. It was beautiful." Jonas was quiet for a long moment. "She doesn't talk about Sarah much, not to me. She's afraid it hurts you to hear it." "It does." Jonas's voice was rough. "But not the way she thinks. It hurts because I'm failing them. Sarah would know what to say, what to do. She'd have Teddy's cough cured and Hazel not so clingy and Mira not so angry. I'm just making it all worse by trying." "That's not true," Lydia said firmly. "You're keeping them safe and fed and warm. You're teaching them to be strong and capable. Those aren't small things, Jonas." He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his face was all shadows and sharp edges. "You're good with them, better than I expected." "I love teaching." The words came out more honestly than Lydia intended. "And your children are special, challenging sometimes, but special. They're getting attached to you." It wasn't quite an accusation, but almost. "I've seen it. Hazel follows you everywhere. Teddy talks about you at supper. Even Mira's starting to soften." "I'm sorry." Lydia's stomach churned with guilt. "I'm trying not to—" "I'm not blaming you," Jonas interrupted. "I'm just worried. Come spring, when you leave, it's going to be hard for them." "It's going to be hard for me too," Lydia thought, but didn't say. Instead, "I'll be as careful as I can." Jonas nodded, then reached out and did something unexpected. He brushed snow off her shoulder where it had fallen from the porch roof, his hand gentle and brief. "You should go in. It's too cold out here." "What about you?" "I'll be in soon. Just need to think for a while." Lydia left him there, but she looked back from the doorway. He was still staring out at the valley, his shoulders bowed beneath a burden she was only beginning to understand. The weight of loving people you were terrified of losing, a burden she was starting to share. Christmas came to the Caldwell Ranch like an unwanted ghost, full of memories that made everyone ache. Lydia woke on Christmas Eve to find Jonas already gone. "Out checking on the cattle," Mira said, though her tone suggested he was really just avoiding the day itself. "Mama loved Christmas," Hazel announced at breakfast, pushing her porridge around with her spoon. "She made gingerbread men with raisin buttons, and we sang carols, and Papa would cut down a tree from up in the hills." "We're not doing that this year," Mira said sharply. "Papa said." "But why not?" Hazel's lower lip trembled. "It's not fair." "Because Mama's not here," Teddy said quietly. "Nothing's the same without her." Lydia felt her heart crack watching their small faces, so resigned to joylessness. 23 days ago, she'd been planning to start a new life as Jonas Caldwell's wife. Instead, she was watching his children mourn a Christmas that would never come again. "What if we made new traditions?" Lydia heard herself say. "Not to replace the old ones, but to honor them. Your mother would want you to have joy, wouldn't she?" 3 pairs of eyes fixed on her with identical expressions of desperate hope mixed with suspicion. "Papa won't like it," Mira said, but her voice held a question. "Let me talk to your father. In the meantime, Hazel, do you remember how your mother made the gingerbread?" "A little bit. She let me help sometimes." "Then you can help me. We'll figure it out together." By the time Jonas returned at noon, stamping snow from his boots and looking like a man who'd been wrestling demons in the cold, the kitchen smelled of ginger and molasses. 3 children sat at the table decorating misshapen cookies with precious sugar saved from the pantry, their faces smudged with flour and actually smiling. Jonas stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What's all this?" His voice was carefully neutral, but Lydia caught the tension in his shoulders. "Miss Harrow is helping us make Christmas," Hazel announced, "like Mama used to." "I hope that's all right," Lydia said quietly, meeting Jonas's eyes across the room. "I thought, we don't celebrate Christmas anymore." The words came out flat, final. "I told the children that." "You told us Mama wouldn't want us to be sad," Mira corrected, suddenly brave. "But you never asked what we wanted." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Mira." I want to remember her happy, Mira continued, her voice shaking but determined. I want to do the things she loved, not forget about them because it hurts. The silence stretched thin and painful. Teddy ducked his head, pushing his cookie around the table. Hazel's eyes filled with tears. Lydia held her breath, waiting. Finally, Jonas's shoulders sagged. All right. Make your gingerbread. Sing your carols. But I've got work to do. He left without taking off his coat, and Lydia heard the barn door slam a moment later. He's mad, Hazel whispered. He's sad, Lydia corrected gently. There's a difference. He misses your mother just as much as you do, maybe more because he was married to her. Then why won't he talk about her? Mira demanded. Why won't he let us say her name? Lydia chose her words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups think they have to be strong all the time. They think if they show they're sad, it will make everyone else sadder. But really, it just makes everyone feel alone. That's stupid, Teddy said, and Lydia couldn't help but smile. You're absolutely right. It is stupid. But people do stupid things when they're hurt. That evening, after a supper that Jonas barely touched, Lydia found him in the barn, supposedly checking on the horses, but really just standing in an empty stall, staring at nothing. The children are worried about you, she said from the doorway. Children worry too much. Jonas didn't turn around. They should be playing, being young, not managing their father's grief. They can't play when they're drowning in their own grief, Lydia said quietly. Grief that you won't let them express because you're afraid it will break you. Jonas spun around, his face hard. You've been here a month. Don't presume to tell me about my family. You're right. I've only been here a month. Lydia stepped into the barn, letting the door close behind her. But in that month, I've watched Mira cry herself to sleep. I've heard Teddy whisper to his mother's picture when he thinks no one's listening. I've held Hazel while she asked me why her mama doesn't love her anymore since she went away. They need you, Jonas. Not the version of you that's locked up tight and strong. The version that's broken too. The version that misses his wife. I can't. Jonas's voice cracked. If I start, I won't stop. And they need someone who can keep going, who can keep this ranch running, They need their father, not a machine. Jonas turned away again, his hands gripping the stall rail so tight his knuckles went white. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. She died in my arms. Did the children tell you that? She died in our bed in the middle of the night while I held her and begged her to breathe. And the last thing she said to me was, take care of our babies. Not, I love you, not goodbye. Just take care of our babies. As if I could ever do it right without her. Lydia's throat closed up. She moved closer, close enough to touch his shoulder, though she didn't quite dare. You're doing the best you can, she said. That's all anyone can do. It's not enough. It will never be enough. Jonas finally looked at her, and his eyes were devastated. And now you're here, and you're making gingerbread and fixing broken dolls and helping Teddy breathe. And the children are starting to hope again. But you're leaving in spring. You made that clear. So what happens then? When they lose someone else they've started to love? The accusation in his voice stung because it was fair. She was temporary. She'd always been temporary. She had no right to come into their lives and make them hope for something she couldn't give them. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to be here and not care about them. I don't know how to teach them and tend them and not love them. Jonas stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so gentle and unexpected that Lydia froze. I know, he said quietly. That's the problem. You care too much. It's going to hurt all of us when you go. Maybe I don't have to go. The words escaped before Lydia could stop them. Maybe, don't. Jonas stepped back abruptly. Don't say things you don't mean. You're here because you had no choice, because winter trapped you, but you've got a life waiting back east. A real life, not playing house with someone else's children on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. This feels more real than anything I had in Philadelphia, Lydia said, and she was surprised to find it was true. Maybe that's what's scaring you. Jonas's expression shuddered closed. I'm not scared. I'm practical. Come spring, you'll leave. That's the agreement. Until then, you're the teacher. Nothing more. He walked past her, out of the barn, leaving Lydia alone with the horses and the smell of hay and the crushing weight of words unsaid. The next morning was Christmas. The children woke early, excited despite their father's darkness, and Lydia helped them hang the few decorations they'd made: paper chains, dried berry garlands, drawings of snowflakes. It was humble compared to the Christmases Lydia remembered from Philadelphia, but there was something pure about it, something honest. Jonas came down to breakfast looking like he hadn't slept. But when Hazel threw her arms around his waist and wished him, "Happy Christmas, Papa," he managed a small smile. "Happy Christmas, Hazelnut." They ate the gingerbread cookies for breakfast, which made Teddy laugh and Mira roll her eyes but smile. Lydia had nothing to give the children as gifts. She'd arrived with barely anything of her own, but she told them stories instead, tales of Christmas in the city, of ice skating and carolers and the grand tree in Washington Square. "It sounds magical," Hazel breathed. "It was," Lydia admitted, "but different magic than this." "What magic is here?" Teddy asked skeptically. "It's just snow and cold." Lydia looked around at the three children, at Jonas watching them from across the room, at the humble house that had somehow become a home. "The magic of people choosing to love each other even when it's hard," she said. "That's the strongest magic there is." Jonas's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a warning, a wish. She couldn't tell which. That afternoon, while the children napped, Jonas surprised everyone by bringing in a small pine tree he'd apparently cut that morning before dawn. It was scraggly and lopsided, but the children screamed with delight. "Thought you might need something to decorate," Jonas said gruffly, avoiding Lydia's eyes. They spent the rest of Christmas Day making it beautiful with what they had. More paper chains, bits of ribbon, even some of Lydia's hairpins twisted into ornaments. It was the ugliest, most wonderful Christmas tree Lydia had ever seen. That night, after the children were finally asleep, drunk on cookies and joy, Lydia found Jonas on the porch again. She was learning this was his thinking place, his grieving place. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the tree. It meant everything to them." "Sarah would have wanted it," Jonas said. "You were right about that. She'd hate me for trying to skip Christmas just because it hurt." "You loved her very much." "I did. I do." Jonas looked at Lydia, his expression complicated. "But loving someone who's gone, it's like carrying around a wound that never quite heals. You learn to live with it, but it never stops hurting." "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. You didn't cause this." Jonas was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm the one who should apologize for what I said last night about you playing house. That was cruel. It was honest. It was scared." Jonas's admission was barely audible. "You were right. I am scared. Scared of caring about someone again. Scared of the children caring about someone who will leave. Scared that if I let myself feel anything, I'll drown in it." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Jonas, but I'm tired of being scared," he interrupted. "And I'm tired of being alone even when I'm surrounded by my own children. So maybe we try something different." "What do you mean?" Jonas turned to face her fully. "I mean, maybe we stop pretending this is temporary. Maybe we stop fighting what's happening between us. Maybe—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Maybe I ask you again, properly this time, to stay, to be my wife, to be their mother." Lydia's breath caught. "You said you needed a wife who could give you more children. I can't. I have 3 children who need a mother more than I need more babies," Jonas said firmly. "And you're good with them. They love you. And He swallowed hard. "I think I could love you too, if you let me." The world seemed to tilt sideways. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was damaged goods, the mail-order bride who'd been rejected, the woman no one wanted, and yet here was Jonas Caldwell asking her to stay, asking her to be his wife. "I don't know what to say," Lydia whispered. "Say you'll think about it," Jonas said. "That's all. Just think about it." Before she could answer, a sound split the night. Teddy, coughing. But not the usual cough. This was worse, violent, ending in a horrible wheezing gasp that meant he couldn't breathe. They both ran. Teddy was sitting up in bed, clutching his throat, his face turning red then purple. Mira stood beside him, frozen in terror. Hazel was crying. "Get him to the kitchen," Lydia ordered, her voice snapping into the authoritative tone she'd used with panicking students. "Near the stove. Mira, start water boiling. Hazel, get me all the blankets you can carry." Jonas carried his son downstairs while Lydia raced to gather her supplies. The herbs, the cloths, everything she'd been using to treat Teddy's condition. But this was different. This was a full attack, the kind that could kill. She made a steam tent with blankets over Teddy and the boiling pot, added eucalyptus and chamomile, and climbed under with him, holding him against her chest. "Breathe with me," she commanded. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, nice and slow. You can do this, Teddy. I know you can." Teddy wheezed, panicking, clawing at his throat. "Look at me," Lydia ordered, gripping his face between her hands. "Look at me. You're not dying. I won't let you die. Now breathe." She exaggerated her own breathing, making it loud and obvious. In, out, in, out. Slowly, agonizingly, Teddy's breathing began to match hers. The wheezing eased. The color started returning to his face. "That's it," Lydia murmured. "That's my brave boy. Keep going." Outside the tent, she could hear Jonas's voice, tight with terror, and Mira crying. But she stayed focused on Teddy, breathing with him, holding him steady, until the attack finally passed. When they emerged from the steam tent 20 minutes later, Teddy was exhausted but breathing normally. Jonas scooped him up immediately, holding him so tightly the boy squeaked. "I'm okay, Papa," Teddy mumbled against his father's shoulder. "Miss Harrow fixed me." Jonas looked at Lydia over his son's head, and the raw gratitude in his eyes made her chest ache. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Lydia could only nod, her own hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. They kept Teddy downstairs for the rest of the night, taking turns watching him, making sure he kept breathing. Hazel refused to go back to bed, curling up next to her brother. Mira sat in the corner, hugging her knees, her face pale. As dawn broke gray and cold through the windows, Teddy finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Jonas carried him upstairs, and the girls followed. Lydia was left alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her makeshift hospital, wet blankets, herb packets, the still steaming pot. She sank into a chair, suddenly bone-tired. "You saved his life." She looked up to find Jonas in the doorway, his face haggard. "I did what I could. It might happen again. He needs to see a real doctor, Jonas, someone with actual training." "Closest doctor is 2 days' ride in good weather. In winter, might as well be on the moon." Jonas moved closer, then did something that shocked her. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "But you knew what to do. You kept him calm. You breathed him through it. That's not something from a book. That's something from the heart." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared. I thought—" "I know, so was I." Jonas squeezed her hands. "But you didn't freeze. You didn't panic. You saved my son." "Our son," Lydia whispered without thinking. If I say yes, he'd be our son." Jonas's face transformed. "Is that a yes?" "I don't know. But she never finished the sentence because Teddy's voice called weakly from upstairs. "Miss Harrow? I'm thirsty." Jonas helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "We'll talk later, about everything, but for now, our son needs water," Lydia finished, and felt a strange thrill at the word "our." The days after Christmas brought a cold snap that froze the world solid. Going outside meant risking frostbite. The animals huddled together for warmth. Even inside, near the fires, breath misted in the air. And then, on a bright January morning that hurt to look at, riders appeared on the horizon. Jonas spotted them first from the window and immediately tensed. "Company, stay inside with the children. Mum." But Lydia saw his hand go to the rifle above the fireplace, and her stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" "That's Silas Hargrove's horse in front," Jonas said grimly. "He doesn't make social calls." Silas Hargrove turned out to be a mountain of a man with a thick beard and eyes like chips of ice. He arrived with 3 men, all armed, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They stopped their horses 20 feet from the porch, and Hargrove remained mounted, looking down at Jonas with clear contempt. "Caldwell," Hargrove said, "we need to talk about the creek." "Nothing to talk about," Jonas replied, his voice level but his body radiating tension. "The creek runs through my land, has for 15 years. Your deed says east boundary is the tree line, creek's past the tree line. That makes it mine." "The hell it does. My deed specifically mentions water rights to Willow Creek. You know that, Silas. Everyone knows that." Hargrove's smile was unpleasant. "Funny thing about old deeds. Sometimes they're unclear. Sometimes they need to be interpreted by a judge. And Judge Morrison? He's a friend of mine." Lydia watched from the window, her heart pounding. Mira pressed against her side, and Lydia could feel the girl trembling. "Papa won't let him take the creek," Mira whispered. "We'll die without that water for the cattle." "What does he want?" Lydia asked. "Our land. He's been trying to buy us out since Mama died. Says Papa can't manage alone. That we should sell and move to town." Outside, Jonas's voice rose slightly. "You bring a judge out here, Silas, and I'll fight you every step. I've got the original deed. I've got surveyor maps. You won't win." "Maybe not," Hargrove agreed pleasantly, "but I can make your life hell trying. Can tie you up in legal costs for years. You got money for lawyers, Jonas? What with 3 kids to feed and winter barely half over?" It was a threat wrapped in logic, and they all knew it. Jonas's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Get off my land!" "Think about it," Hargrove said. "I'm offering fair price. More than fair. You take it, you and the kids can live comfortable in town. No more breaking your back out here. No more—" "I said get off my land." Jonas's voice was deadly quiet now. "Before I make you." Hargrove's men shifted uneasily, hands moving toward weapons. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. And then Lydia did something that would later seem insane. She walked out onto the porch. "Mr. Hargrove," she called out, her voice carrying across the frozen yard. "Good morning." All eyes turned to her. Jonas's expression was thunderous. "Lydia, get inside." But she moved to stand beside him, her hands folded calmly in front of her, every inch the proper Philadelphia lady. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Mrs. Caldwell." The lie came out smooth and natural, and Jonas's indrawn breath told her he understood what she was doing. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "Heard Jonas was getting married. Didn't believe it. Mail-order bride, wasn't it?" "I came from Philadelphia to marry Mr. Caldwell. Yes," Lydia said coolly. "We wed just after Christmas. A small ceremony, family only. But I'm afraid I don't understand this talk of selling. My husband hasn't mentioned any such plans to me." "Your husband's in debt up to his eyeballs," Hargrove said bluntly. "Ranch is failing. He's too proud to admit it, but another year or two and he'll lose everything anyway." "How interesting," Lydia said, her voice dripping with the kind of aristocratic disdain her mother had perfected. "Because the ledgers I've reviewed suggest otherwise. The ranch is running quite profitably, actually. We had an excellent year with the calves and the prices at market—" "You're a woman," Hargrove interrupted. "You don't understand ranching." "I understand numbers," Lydia said, "and I understand bullies. You want this land because it's valuable, not because Mr. Caldwell is failing. The creek is the best water source for miles. Whoever controls it controls the entire valley. That's not charity you're offering, Mr. Hargrove. That's theft dressed up as kindness." Hargrove's face darkened. "Careful, Mrs. Caldwell. That's a serious accusation." "It's an accurate one." Lydia didn't back down. "Now, I believe my husband asked you to leave. I suggest you do so before I'm forced to note your trespassing in my correspondence with the territorial governor. He and my father were at Harvard together. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear about local land disputes." It was a complete bluff. Lydia's father had never been to Harvard, and certainly didn't know any governors, but she delivered it with such confidence that Hargrove actually hesitated. "This isn't over," he finally said, yanking his horse's reins. "I'm certain it's not," Lydia agreed pleasantly. "Good day, Mr. Hargrove." They watched the riders leave, dust rising behind them despite the frozen ground. When they were finally out of sight, Jonas turned to Lydia, his expression caught between fury and admiration. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. That was me protecting what's ours, Lydia said, and realized she meant it. Somewhere in the last month, this ranch had become hers to defend. He's a bully. Bullies back down when someone stands up to them. He's a dangerous bully. You think he's just going to accept being embarrassed by a woman? Probably not. Lydia's hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over, but she kept her voice steady. But at least he knows you're not alone anymore. That you have someone standing with you. Jonas stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he cupped her face in both hands and kissed her. It was brief, fierce, and tasted like desperation and hope mixed together. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Marry me," he said. "Really marry me. Not because you're trapped here, not because you feel obligated. Marry me because you want this life. This ranch. These children. Me." Lydia's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. "Jonas? She's going to be our mama!" Hazel's delighted shriek cut through the moment. The children had apparently been watching from the window and had excellent hearing. Mira and Teddy appeared on the porch, their faces cautiously hopeful. "Is it true?" Mira asked. "Are you really going to stay?" Lydia looked at Jonas, at his children, at the ranch spread out before them in its frozen beauty. She thought about Philadelphia, about her sister who wouldn't speak to her, about the life she'd left behind that had never quite fit. She thought about steam tents and gingerbread cookies and the way Hazel held her hand. She thought about Mira's slowly softening defenses, and Teddy's quiet courage, and Jonas's rare smiles that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'm going to stay." The children erupted in chaos, all three trying to hug her at once. Jonas pulled them all together into one awkward, wonderful embrace, and for the first time since her train had pulled out of Philadelphia station, Lydia felt like she'd come home. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, reality set in. Silas Hargrove wasn't going to give up. The legal battle over the creek could destroy them, and she'd just lied to a dangerous man about being married to Jonas when they hadn't even properly courted yet. She'd also tied herself to a life she didn't fully understand, on a ranch that could fail, with 3 children who might grow to resent her trying to replace their mother. What had she done? The answer came in the darkness, quiet but certain. The only thing I could. The only thing that felt right. And for now, that would have to be enough. The morning after Lydia's promise brought an unexpected visitor, Reverend Thomas from the church in town, arriving on a tired mule with news that spread through the house like wildfire. Hargrove's filing a formal complaint with the Territorial Land Office, the Reverend said, warming his hands by the fire, while Jonas's face grew darker by the second. "Claims your deed is fraudulent. Says the original survey was done wrong and the creek belongs to him by right." "That's a damn lie," Jonas growled. "My father bought this land fair and square in 1867. The deed's been recorded for 18 years. I know that, son. Everyone knows that. But Hargrove's got money for lawyers, and you know how these things go. Judge Morrison won't rule against him without a fight." Reverend Thomas looked apologetic. "I came to warn you, and to offer what help I can." Lydia brought coffee, her mind racing. She'd studied law briefly. Her father had insisted all his daughters understand contracts before marriage. What would it take to prove the deed is legitimate? "Original survey documents," Jonas said, "filed with the territorial office in Helena. But that's a week's ride in good weather. In winter—" He shook his head. "Impossible." "Not impossible," the Reverend corrected. "Just difficult. And expensive. You'd need to hire someone to make the trip, pay for certified copies, bring them back before Hargrove gets his hearing scheduled." He paused. "Could cost $100 or more." Jonas's face went gray. $100 might as well have been 1,000. The ranch barely made enough to keep them fed and warm through winter. "How long do we have?" Lydia asked. "Hearings set for first week of March, 6 weeks, give or take." After the Reverend left, Jonas sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. The children had been sent outside to do chores, giving the adults privacy to discuss what felt like impending disaster. "We could sell some cattle," Lydia suggested. "Raise the money that way." "Cattle prices are at rock bottom in winter. I'd have to sell 20 head to make $100, and that's if I could even get them to market in this weather. We need those cattle for spring breeding." Jonas looked up, his eyes haunted. Hargrove knows exactly what he's doing. He's timing this perfectly. I can't fight him. Then we find another way. Lydia's voice was firm. There has to be something. There isn't. Jonas stood abruptly, pacing. I'm going to lose the ranch, lose everything my father built. And those children out there, Sarah's children, they're going to grow up in some cramped house in town while Hargrove waters his cattle in our creek. Stop it, Lydia said sharply. Stop surrendering before the battle's even started. You taught your children to be fighters. Now fight. Jonas looked at her, something flickering in his expression. Gratitude, maybe, or desperation. What would you have me do, Lydia? Rob a bank? Of course not, but there are other options. We could go to the land office ourselves. I could go. You? Jonas laughed bitterly. Woman traveling alone in winter? That's suicide. I traveled alone from Philadelphia, on trains and stagecoaches with other passengers. This would be different. Mountain passes in February, wolves, weather that could turn deadly in an hour. He shook his head violently. No, absolutely not. Then come with me. We'll go together. And leave the children alone for 2 weeks? With Teddy's lungs still weak, and God knows what Hargrove might try if he knows we're gone. Jonas's voice rose. Think, Lydia. There's no good choice here. They stood facing each other across the kitchen, the impossibility of the situation hanging between them like smoke. There's always a choice, Lydia said quietly. We just have to be brave enough to make it. That afternoon, while Jonas was out checking the fence line, Lydia did something that would either save them or destroy what little trust they'd built. She searched the house. She found it in a trunk in Jonas and Sarah's old bedroom, the room Jonas no longer slept in, preferring the smaller room downstairs. Papers, neatly organized and labeled in a woman's careful hand. Sarah's hand, Lydia realized, feeling like an intruder in a dead woman's private space. But there, at the bottom of the trunk, was a leather folder marked Land Documents. And inside, miracle of miracles, was a copy of the original survey, yellowed with age but perfectly legible. A note in Sarah's handwriting was pinned to it. Important, filed with Territorial Office, 1867, copy made 1883 when Jonas worried about fire. Keep safe. Lydia's hands shook as she read. This was it. This was their defense. Not the original, but a contemporary copy that could at least prove the survey existed, that Jonas's claim wasn't fabricated. She was still holding the folder when Jonas came in, stamping snow from his boots. He froze when he saw her, saw what she held, and his face went through a dozen emotions at once. You went through Sarah's things. His voice was flat, dangerous. I was looking for the survey documents. Jonas, I found... You had no right. He crossed the room in 3 strides, snatching the folder from her hands. Those are private. Sarah's private things. You don't touch them. I'm trying to help you. By violating my dead wife's privacy? By going through her belongings like some kind of thief? Jonas's face was flushed with anger. You've been here 2 months, Lydia. 2 months. That doesn't give you the right to... I found a copy of the survey, Lydia shouted, her own temper finally breaking. That's what I was trying to tell you before you started accusing me of theft. Your wife, your smart, careful wife, made a copy of the survey in 1883 and saved it in case you ever needed it. And you need it now. Jonas stopped, the folder clutched against his chest. What? Look. Lydia pulled the document from the folder, spreading it on the bed. It's all here. The boundary lines, the creek, everything, dated and notarized. It's not the original, but it proves the original existed, that your claim is legitimate. Jonas stared at the paper, his anger draining away into something that looked like grief. Sarah did this? She protected you. Even knowing she was dying, she protected you. Jonas sat down heavily on the bed, still holding the document. I didn't know. She never told me. She probably did it when she first got sick, when she knew time was running out. Lydia's voice gentled. I'm sorry I went through her things without asking. But Jonas, this could save the ranch. We take this to the land office, show them we have documentation, and Hargrove's case falls apart. It's not the original, Jonas said, but he was studying the document with new hope in his eyes. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's more than we had an hour ago. Jonas looked up at her, and the complexity in his expression made Lydia's chest tight. Why are you doing this? Fighting so hard for a place that isn't even yours yet? Because it will be mine. Because those children out there deserve to grow up on their family's land. Because you deserve not to lose everything. She paused. And because Sarah left you a gift, the least we can do is use it. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, carefully refolding the document. We'll need to take this to Helena, get it verified, submitted as evidence. But you were right about one thing. We can't both go. Someone has to stay with the children. I'll go, Lydia said immediately. Lydia, you're needed here. You know the ranch, the cattle, how to keep everything running. I'm just the teacher, and I'm the one who found the document. Let me do this. It's too dangerous. Life is dangerous. Lydia moved closer, taking his hands. But hiding from danger doesn't make it go away. Your wife knew that. She fought her illness as long as she could. She prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Let me honor her courage by being brave too. Jonas's grip tightened on her hands. If something happened to you, then you'd go on. You'd take care of the children. You'd keep fighting. That's what we do. She smiled slightly. Besides, I didn't survive 23 days of travel just to be defeated by a simple trip to Helena. There's nothing simple about it. Then it's a good thing I'm not a simple woman. Despite everything, Jonas laughed. No, you're really not. That evening, over supper, they told the children. The reaction was immediate and loud. You can't go alone. Mira's face was white. What if something happens? What if you don't come back? I'll come back, Lydia promised. I swear it. Mama said she'd get better, and she didn't, Teddy said, his voice small. People don't always come back when they promise. The pain in his words cut deep. Lydia knelt beside his chair, taking his face in her hands. You're right. Your mama didn't have a choice about leaving, but I do have a choice, and I'm choosing to come back. To you, to your sisters, to your father, to our home. When? Hazel asked, tears already streaming down her face. When will you come back? 2 weeks, maybe less if the weather holds. I'll leave at first light, take the stage from town, be back before you know it. 2 weeks is forever, Hazel sobbed, and Lydia gathered her close, feeling the small body shake with fear. I know it feels that way, but time passes quickly when you're busy. You'll have lessons to keep up with. Mira, I'm putting you in charge of teaching while I'm gone. Teddy, you'll help your father with the ranch work. Hazel, you'll be the very best helper anyone could ask for, and before you know it, I'll be walking back through that door. Jonas watched the scene with tight jaw. Later, after the children were finally in bed, Hazel only agreeing to sleep after extracting a promise that Lydia would wake her to say goodbye, he found Lydia in the kitchen packing supplies for the journey. There's still time to change your mind, he said quietly. I'm not changing my mind. Lydia? She turned to face him. Do you trust me? The question hung between them. Jonas studied her face in the lamplight. This woman who'd arrived rejected and alone, who'd won his children's hearts, who'd stood beside him against Hargrove, who'd found Sarah's gift when he'd given up hope. Yes, he said finally. God help me, I do. Then let me do this. Let me fight for us. Jonas crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. The embrace was different from the brief, fierce kiss on the porch. This was slower, deeper, full of unspoken fears and desperate wishes. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright. You come back to me, he said hoarsely. To us. You hear me, Lydia Harrow? You come back. Harrow Caldwell, she corrected softly. Or it will be soon. I'm coming back, Jonas. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. She left before dawn, in the bitter cold that made breathing hurt. Jonas drove her to town in the wagon, the children bundled in back despite his protests that they should stay warm at home. We have to say goodbye properly, Mira had insisted, and there was no arguing with her. At the stage station, Lydia hugged each child fiercely. Hazel clung and cried. Teddy tried to be brave, but his lip trembled. Mira squeezed tight and whispered, Please don't die like Mama. I won't, Lydia whispered back. I promise. Jonas handed her a small bag of money, everything they could spare. Bribe whoever you need to. Pay whatever it costs. Just get those documents verified and get home safe. I will. Lydia. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Then he kissed her, right there in front of God and the children and the stage driver, a kiss that felt like a vow. I love you, he said against her lips. Took me too long to say it, but I love you. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. All of you. I'm coming back. The stage pulled away, and through the back window she watched them standing in the snow. Her family, she realized. Not by blood, but by choice. And she would fight heaven and hell to get back to them. The journey to Helena was every bit as miserable as Jonas had warned. The stage was cramped and cold, her fellow passengers suspicious of a woman traveling alone. The mountain passes were treacherous, and twice they had to stop for avalanche danger. At night, in cheap boarding houses, Lydia lay awake wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But she thought about Jonas's face when he'd said he loved her, about Mira's slowly softening defenses, about Teddy's courage and Hazel's desperate need for a mother, about Sarah's careful handwriting on that document, keep safe. She was doing this for all of them, for the family she'd found when she'd stopped looking. Helena was overwhelming after weeks on the ranch, crowded streets, noise, the press of humanity after so much isolation. Lydia navigated it with the determination of desperation, finding the territorial land office, presenting her case to a clerk who looked bored until she mentioned Silas Hargrove's name. Hargrove's been buying up half the territory, the clerk said, suddenly interested. Legal and otherwise. You got proof this deed is legitimate? I have a contemporary copy, made in 1883, notarized. She showed him the document. The clerk studied it, his expression growing more serious. This is good, real good, but you'll need the original survey filed here to verify it matches. Can we find it? If it exists, it's in the archives, but, miss, those archives— He gestured to a room full of filing cabinets that looked like they'd been organized by a drunk. Could take days to search. Then we start searching. 3 days. 3 days of dusty files and yellowed papers and dead ends. Lydia's hands cramped from rifling through documents. Her eyes ached from reading faded ink by lamplight. The boarding house bed was hard and lonely, and every night she thought about the family waiting for her. And then, in a file mislabeled as 1865 when it should have been 1867, she found it. The original survey. Every line matching Sarah's copy. Proof positive that Jonas's claim was legitimate, that the creek belonged to the Caldwell Ranch, that Hargrove's complaint was fraudulent. Lydia actually cried in the archives office, clutching the document like it was made of gold. Getting it certified took another 2 days and cost nearly half their money. But when Lydia left Helena, she carried official copies bearing the territorial seal, documents that would stand up in any court. She'd done it. Against all odds, she'd done it. The journey back felt faster, propelled by hope and urgency. But 3 days from home, disaster struck. They were crossing through the mountains when the driver spotted smoke. Indians, he muttered, though everyone knew the local tribes were peaceful, and it was February besides. Or outlaws. Either way, we need to move. He pushed the horses too hard, too fast. The stage hit a rut in the road, lurched sideways, and one wheel splintered with a crack like a gunshot. They tilted, sliding toward the edge of the road and the 100-foot drop below. Lydia grabbed the documents, clutching them to her chest as the world went sideways. Someone screamed. The stage was falling, and all she could think was, I promised I'd come back. I promised. But they didn't fall. The stage hung half off the road, balanced impossibly on the 3 remaining wheels, everyone frozen in terror. Don't move, the driver hissed. Don't even breathe. They evacuated one by one, crawling out the upward tilting door with agonizing slowness. Lydia was last, the document still clutched in her arms. She was halfway out when the stage groaned, shifted, started sliding. Jump! Someone yelled. Lydia jumped. She hit the road hard, rolling, the document scattering across the snow. Behind her, the stage tipped over the edge and plummeted, crashing into the ravine below with a sound like the end of the world. For a moment, everyone just stood there, breathing hard, alive by pure chance. Then Lydia scrambled to gather the scattered documents, checking frantically to make sure none had blown over the edge. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them. You all right, miss? the driver asked. I'm fine. The papers, are they all here? They were. Every single one, as if Sarah herself had protected them. The rest of the journey, Lydia walked. They all did, the driver leading the horses, the passengers following in a ragged line. It took 2 more days to reach civilization, 2 days of cold and exhaustion and fear. But Lydia kept moving, kept clutching those documents, kept thinking, I'm coming back. I promised. When she finally stumbled into Willow Ridge, 5 days overdue and looking like something dragged through hell, Jonas was there. He'd been checking the stage station every day, the driver said later, standing there in the cold for hours, waiting, hoping, probably praying. And when Lydia appeared, alive and filthy and limping but alive, he ran to her like a man possessed. You're late, he said, crushing her against his chest. You're 5 days late. I know, I'm sorry. The stage crashed, we had to walk, I came as fast as I could. The words tumbled out in a rush. But Jonas, I got them, the documents, they're verified. We can prove the land is yours. Jonas pulled back just far enough to see her face. To hell with the documents. Are you hurt? Just bruised. Jonas, we can fight Hargrove now. We can win. I don't care. His voice broke. I don't care about the land or Hargrove or any of it. I thought I'd lost you. I thought those children would lose another mother. I thought I'd lose the woman I love before I even got to marry her properly. Lydia started crying then, all the fear and exhaustion and terror of the past week pouring out. Jonas held her through it, right there in the street, not caring who saw. The children, she finally managed, are they home? Worried sick. Mira hasn't slept more than a few hours since you left. Teddy's been coughing again. Hazel cries every night. He cupped her face in his hands. But they're about to be very, very happy. The ride back to the ranch felt like traveling toward the sun. And when they arrived, 3 small figures exploded from the house, running through the snow, screaming her name. Lydia barely got out of the wagon before they hit her like a wave, Hazel sobbing into her skirts, Teddy clinging to her arm, Mira hugging her so tight it hurt. You came back, Mira kept saying. You came back, you came back. I promised, didn't I? Lydia's voice was thick with tears. I'll always come back to you. That night, after the children were finally settled, all 3 insisting on sleeping in the main room, as close to Lydia as possible, she and Jonas sat by the fire. The documents lay on the table between them, official and undeniable. Hearings in 3 days, Jonas said. We take these to Judge Morrison, and Hargrove's case falls apart. Good. You could have died, Lydia. That stage going over the edge. Jonas's voice was tight. I keep thinking about you falling, and I can't breathe. But I didn't fall. The stage did, but I didn't. She reached for his hand. I'm here, we're all here, and we're going to win this. Jonas pulled her close, and they sat like that for a long time, the fire burning low, the house quiet around them. Outside, winter still held the land in its grip. But inside, surrounded by the warmth of family and the promise of spring, everything felt possible. Marry me, Jonas said suddenly. Before the hearing, before anything else can go wrong, marry me this week. Lydia pulled back to look at him. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. His eyes were fierce. You've proven yourself 100 times over. You saved Teddy's life. You stood up to Hargrove. You went to Helena and nearly died getting those documents. You kept your promise to come back even when it would have been easier to stay away. You're already their mother in every way that matters. Let me make you my wife in truth. Yes, Lydia whispered. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Jonas kissed her, and this time it tasted like hope instead of desperation, like beginning instead of ending. But neither of them knew that the real test was yet to come, that Hargrove wouldn't give up so easily, that the next few weeks would push them all to their breaking point, that sometimes winning meant surviving the battle first. They were married 2 days later in the front room of the ranch house, with Reverend Thomas presiding and the 3 children as witnesses. Lydia wore her best dress, the gray wool she'd arrived in, carefully mended and pressed. Jonas wore a suit that had belonged to his father, the shoulders a bit too broad but dignified nonetheless. Mira held a small bouquet of dried flowers from Sarah's garden, preserved somehow through the winter, and pressed it into Lydia's hands before the ceremony began. "Mama would want you to have something beautiful," she whispered. Lydia's throat closed up. "Thank you, sweetheart." The ceremony was simple. Jonas's hands trembled when he slid the ring onto her finger. His mother's ring, he'd told her the night before, brought from Missouri in a covered wagon 40 years ago. The gold was worn smooth, but it fit perfectly. "I, Jonas Caldwell, take you, Lydia Harrow, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death parts us." Lydia repeated the vows, and when she said, "until death parts us," she saw Jonas's jaw tighten, thinking probably of Sarah, of how death had parted them too soon. But then his eyes focused on her, really focused, and something in his expression shifted, from grief to hope, from past to future. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said with a gentle smile. The kiss was chaste, appropriate for the children watching, but Lydia felt it all the way to her toes. When they pulled apart, Hazel was bouncing on her feet with excitement. "Now you're really our mama," she announced. "Not just pretend." "That's right," Lydia agreed, kneeling down to hug all three children at once. "Now I'm really your mama." Teddy's arms went around her neck. "Forever?" "Forever and ever." The celebration was modest. A special supper with a cake Mrs. Henderson from town had sent out, knowing they were getting married. The children were allowed to stay up late, and they sang songs around the fire, even Mira joining in with her surprisingly lovely voice. But as the evening wore on, reality settled back in. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow, they would face Hargrove in Judge Morrison's court and fight for everything they'd built. After the children were finally in bed, Jonas found Lydia in the kitchen, washing the dishes with movements that were too quick, too anxious. "Hey," he said softly, taking the plate from her hands. "They'll still be dirty tomorrow if you need to worry at them some more." "I can't stop thinking about the hearing. What if the documents aren't enough? What if Judge Morrison rules for Hargrove anyway? Then we appeal. We fight harder." Jonas set the plate down and pulled her into his arms. "But Lydia, even if we lose the ranch, and we won't, we still have each other. We still have the children. We'll survive. This is your family's land, your father's legacy. My father's legacy is me, and my children, and now you." Jonas tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "The land matters, yes, but it's not what makes us a family. We are." Lydia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When did you become so wise?" "About 5 minutes ago. Don't expect it to last." His arms tightened around her. "Come to bed, wife. Tomorrow we face the wolves. Tonight, let's just be happy." They climbed the stairs together, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Lydia entered the main bedroom, the one that had been Jonas and Sarah's, the one Jonas had avoided for 18 months. He'd cleaned it out earlier that day, she realized. The personal items were gone, stored respectfully away. Fresh linens covered the bed. Wildflowers, where he'd found them in February she couldn't imagine, sat in a jar by the window. "I wanted it to be ours," Jonas said quietly. "Not haunted by the past. A new beginning." Lydia turned to him, tears in her eyes. "It's perfect." That night, in the darkness of their room, with the Montana wind howling outside and the warmth of their marriage bed surrounding them, Lydia finally felt what she'd been searching for since leaving Philadelphia. Not just acceptance, but belonging. Not just shelter, but home. Morning came too quickly. They rode into town as a family, the children bundled in the wagon bed, tension radiating from every adult muscle. The courthouse was a simple building, barely more than a large cabin, but it held the power to destroy them. Inside, the room was already packed. Hargrove sat at the front with 2 lawyers, looking confident and prosperous in a suit that probably cost more than Jonas made in a year. When he saw Lydia and Jonas enter together, something ugly flickered across his face. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his tone mocking. "Or should I say, the new Mrs. Caldwell. Congratulations on your marriage. Convenient timing. Mr. Hargrove, Lydia replied coolly. How kind of you to notice. Judge Morrison entered before Hargrove could respond, a rail-thin man with white whiskers and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Let's get started, he said, settling behind his desk. Mr. Hargrove, you're claiming the Caldwell Ranch boundaries are fraudulent. Present your evidence. What followed was an hour of legal maneuvering that made Lydia's head spin. Hargrove's lawyers presented maps, surveys, testimonies from experts who claimed the original boundary markers had been moved. They argued that Willow Creek had always been on Hargrove land, that Jonas's deed was either forged or based on faulty information. It was impressive in a horrifying way. Lies delivered with such confidence they almost sounded like truth. Then it was their turn. Jonas stood, and Lydia saw his hands shaking as he presented their documents, Sarah's copy and the verified originals from Helena. His voice was rough but clear as he explained the provenance, the dates, the careful notarization. My wife made a copy of these documents in 1883, Jonas said, and Lydia heard the grief underneath. Sarah Caldwell. She knew how important they were. She protected them. And now they prove beyond any doubt that this land, including water rights to Willow Creek, belongs to my family. Has belonged to us since 1867. Hargrove's lead lawyer stood immediately. Your Honor, we don't dispute that Mr. Caldwell has documents. We dispute their accuracy. The original survey was conducted by Thomas Brennan, Judge Morrison interrupted, studying the papers. I knew Tom Brennan, honest as the day is long, did surveys for half the territory before he died. He looked up, his eyes sharp. You calling him a liar, counselor? The lawyer faltered. Not exactly, Your Honor, but because if you're not calling him a liar, then you're accepting his survey as accurate, which means Mr. Caldwell's claim stands. Morrison turned to Hargrove. Silas, I've known you for 20 years. You're a shrewd businessman. But this is land theft dressed up in legal clothes. Your Honor, I protest, Hargrove began, his face reddening. Protest all you want. I'm ruling for the Caldwells. The boundaries stand as originally surveyed. Willow Creek remains on Caldwell land with all associated water rights. Morrison banged his gavel. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Hargrove surged to his feet, furious. His lawyers clustered around him, arguing. Jonas stood frozen, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Lydia grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. We won! Jonas, we won! We won, he repeated, dazed. Then it seemed to sink in, and he laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. He swept Lydia up, spinning her around right there in the courthouse, while the children cheered and Hargrove glowered, and Judge Morrison watched with an approving smile. But as they filed out of the courthouse into the bright February sunshine, Hargrove caught Jonas's arm. This isn't over, he said quietly, his voice full of poison. You think some old papers change anything? You're still barely hanging on out there. One bad season, one disaster, and you'll come begging me to buy you out. I'll die first, Jonas said evenly. That can be arranged, Hargrove replied, and something in his tone made Lydia's blood run cold. Jonas must have heard it too because his face went hard. You threatening me, Silas? Just stating facts. Montana's a dangerous place. Accidents happen. Hargrove smiled, showing too many teeth, especially to people who make powerful enemies. He walked away before Jonas could respond, leaving them standing in the street with the children pressed close, suddenly aware that winning in court didn't mean the fight was over. Papa? Mira's voice was small. What did he mean? Nothing, Bug. Just a sore loser talking big. But Jonas's eyes followed Hargrove's retreating back, and Lydia saw genuine concern there. That night, after celebrating their victory with the special dinner Lydia had prepared, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Jonas checked every lock twice. He loaded the rifle that hung above the door and kept it closer than usual. You really think he'd try something? Lydia asked, watching him move through the house like a soldier expecting attack. Silas Hargrove doesn't make empty threats. He's used to getting what he wants, and we just humiliated him in open court. Jonas paused at the window, staring out at the dark. We need to be careful. All of us. Maybe we should ask for help. The Reverend or some of the other ranchers, most of them are either too scared of Hargrove or in debt to him. We're on our own. Jonas turned to her, his face grim. I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, you take the children and go. Don't try to fight him. Just go. Jonas, don't talk like that. Promise me, Lydia. She wanted to argue, to tell him nothing would happen, that they were safe now, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. I promise, but nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it. Jonas managed a small smile. My fierce wife. When did you get so brave? When I fell in love with a stubborn rancher and his 3 impossible children. She moved into his arms. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. But that night, Lydia lay awake long after Jonas's breathing had evened out in sleep, listening to every sound the house made, every whisper of wind against the windows. Hargrove's words echoed in her mind. Accidents happen. She was still awake when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A creak of floorboards downstairs, too heavy to be one of the children. Lydia's heart slammed against her ribs. She shook Jonas awake, pressing her hand over his mouth before he could speak. His eyes opened instantly, alert. Someone's downstairs, she breathed into his ear. Jonas was out of bed in seconds, grabbing the rifle. He motioned for Lydia to stay, but there was no chance of that. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the bedroom fireplace and followed him. They crept down the stairs, every step an agony of trying to stay silent. The sound came again, definitely in the house, moving toward the kitchen. Jonas raised the rifle as they rounded the corner. Don't move or I'll shoot. Papa, don't! Mira's voice, high and terrified. Jonas lowered the rifle immediately, and Lydia ran forward to where the girl stood in the kitchen, her nightgown ghostly white in the darkness. Mira, what are you doing down here? Lydia's voice came out harsh with relief and residual fear. I heard something outside, by the barn. Mira's face was pale. Voices. I came down to tell you, but then I heard you on the stairs and I got scared. Jonas was already moving to the window, peering out into the darkness. Where? What direction? North side, near the big doors. Mira pressed against Lydia, trembling. Papa, I'm scared. What if it's Mr. Hargrove? Stay here with your mother, Jonas ordered, already heading for the door. No! Lydia's voice was sharp. You are not going out there alone. No. We'll send for help. We'll wait until morning when we can see. We're not giving them the advantage of darkness. Jonas looked like he wanted to argue, but another sound cut through the night. Horses, multiple horses, moving fast. And then, the unmistakable smell of smoke. The barn, Jonas breathed, and then he was running. Lydia screamed for him to stop, but he was already out the door. She turned to Mira. Wake your siblings, get them dressed and ready to move. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, you take them and run to the Henderson place. Understand? But now, Mira! Lydia ran after Jonas, her nightgown catching on bushes, the cold air burning her lungs. The barn was already burning, flames licking up the north wall where the hay was stored. Jonas was trying to get the doors open, to free the horses trapped inside, but the heat was too intense. Jonas, stop! Lydia grabbed his arm. You'll die in there. The horses are not worth your life. She yanked him back as part of the roof collapsed, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. We have to let it burn. The anguish on Jonas's face was devastating. Those horses were expensive, necessary for ranch work. Losing them would be a financial disaster. But going into that inferno was suicide. They stood there helplessly, watching the barn burn, and Lydia knew without doubt that this was Hargrove's doing. This was his response to losing in court. Destroy what he couldn't have. Papa! Mama! Teddy's voice, high and panicked. Lydia turned to see all 3 children running toward them, and her heart nearly stopped. I told you to stay inside. The house is on fire too, Mira screamed, pointing. Lydia spun around. Smoke was pouring from the kitchen windows. Someone had set multiple fires, trapping them between the burning buildings. The creek, Jonas said, his voice oddly calm despite the disaster unfolding around them. We get to the creek, away from the buildings. Now. They ran as a family, Jonas carrying Hazel, Mira and Teddy clutching Lydia's hands. Behind them, both buildings burned against the night sky, and Lydia had one horrible, clear thought. We're going to lose everything. They huddled on the creek bank, wrapped in the blankets Jonas had grabbed, watching their home burn. The children were crying. Jonas's face was stone, but Lydia saw his hands shaking. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I pushed to fight him. If we'd just accepted his offer, then we'd be surrendering to a bully," Jonas said firmly, "and teaching our children that evil wins if you're too scared to stand against it. No, Lydia, this is Hargrove's fault, his crime, his sin. But everything, the house, the barn, your tools, can be rebuilt." Jonas pulled all of them closer. "We're alive, all of us. That's what matters." "Where will we go?" Hazel asked, her voice very small. It was a good question. The house was gone. The barn was gone. All their supplies, their food stores, their clothing, everything but what they wore, and what Jonas had grabbed was ash. "Town, I guess," Jonas said slowly. "Find rooms at the boarding house until—" "No!" Lydia's voice was suddenly fierce. "We're not leaving. We're not giving him that satisfaction." "Lydia, be reasonable. We have nowhere to live. We have the land. We have each other." She looked at him, her eyes blazing in the firelight. "You said the land doesn't make us a family." "We do. So we stay. We camp if we have to. We rebuild. But we don't run." Jonas stared at her like he'd never seen her before. "You're serious?" "Completely. Hargrove wants us broken and scattered. I won't give him that." She looked at the children. "What do you say? Are we fighters or quitters?" "Fighters," Mira said immediately, her jaw set in a line that reminded Lydia of Jonas. "Fighters," Teddy echoed, trying to sound brave despite his tears. Even Hazel nodded, clutching her rescued doll. "We stay with Mama and Papa." Jonas's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been fierce pride. "Then we stay, and we rebuild, together." As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of their home, the Caldwell family sat together on the creek bank, cold and exhausted and homeless, but unbroken. Lydia leaned into Jonas's shoulder, feeling the children pressed around them, and thought about how far she'd come from that mail-order bride rejected for being barren. She'd found something better than perfection. She'd found purpose. She'd found family. She'd found herself. And no fire, no bully, no disaster could take that away. By mid-morning, news of the fire had spread, and people started arriving. Reverend Thomas came first, bringing blankets and food. Then Mrs. Henderson, with clothing her own grown children had left behind. Other ranchers appeared, men who'd been too scared to stand against Hargrove publicly, but who brought tools and offers of labor. "Heard what happened," old Pete Martinez said, his weathered face grim. "Heard it was no accident. Hargrove's gone too far this time." "Can you prove it was him?" Jonas asked. "Found horse tracks leading back toward his property. Found some things in the ashes that don't belong, kerosene cans, rags tied together for wicks." Pete spat into the dirt. "Man's always been ruthless, but this is attempted murder." "What can we do?" Jonas's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Morrison already ruled against him, going back to court." "Forget court," Pete interrupted. "Court's for civilized disputes. This is something else. This is war." "I won't start shooting," Jonas said firmly. "I have children to think about." "Nobody's talking about shooting, but there are other ways to fight." Pete looked at the gathered men, all nodding agreement. "Hargrove's power comes from fear and money. We start standing together, that power disappears. We help you rebuild. We watch each other's properties. We make it clear that attacking one of us means attacking all of us." It was the closest thing to an alliance Lydia had seen since arriving. These hard, independent ranchers, finally united against a common enemy. "Why now?" she asked. "Why help us now when you wouldn't stand with us before?" Pete's expression was shamefaced. "Because before, it was legal maneuvering, business. That we could look away from. But burning a family out of their home? Nearly killing children?" He shook his head. "That crosses a line. Some things you can't ignore." Over the next few days, the miracle of community unfolded. The men rebuilt the barn first. A simple structure, nothing fancy, but functional. The women brought food and helped sort through the salvageable items from the house ruins, which weren't many. Someone donated a tent, large enough for the family to sleep in while the house was rebuilt. It was hard, grinding work. They fell into bed exhausted every night, only to wake before dawn and start again. The children helped as they could, Mira watching Hazel, Teddy fetching water, all of them being braver than children should have to be. But slowly, impossibly, things took shape. Walls went up. A roof appeared. Windows were installed, donated from a house in town being torn down. It wouldn't be as large as the original house, or as comfortable, but it would be home. Through it all, Hargrove stayed conspicuously absent. No one saw him in town, no one heard from him. It was as if he'd disappeared, and that worried Lydia more than his presence would have. "He's planning something," she said to Jonas one evening as they sat outside the half-built house, watching the sunset. "I know, but what?" The answer came 3 weeks after the fire. Sheriff Daniels rode out to the ranch, his face grave. "Jonas, Lydia, need to talk to you." They gathered in what would become their new kitchen, though it was currently just framed walls and a dirt floor. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, turning his hat in his hands. "Silas Hargrove's filed charges," he finally said. "Against you, Lydia." "What?" Lydia's voice was sharp with disbelief. "On what grounds?" "Fraud. Claims you lied about being married to get favorable treatment in court. Says the whole marriage is a sham, arranged specifically to strengthen Jonas's land claim." The sheriff looked apologetic. "He's demanding an investigation, wants the marriage annulled and the court case reopened." Jonas was on his feet instantly. "That's insane. We're legally married. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony." I know, and I think it's garbage. But Hargrove's hired lawyers, big city lawyers, and they're making noise about mail-order bride fraud being common, about women marrying for convenience and then running off with property." The sheriff sighed. "Judge Morrison has to at least hear the case. That's the law." Lydia felt the world tilting again. Just when they thought they were safe, Hargrove had found a new weapon, and this one cut straight to the heart of everything they'd built. "When's the hearing?" Jonas asked, his voice dangerous. 2 weeks. I'm sorry, Jonas. I really am." After the sheriff left, Jonas punched the wall, or what would be a wall once they finished it. His knuckles came away bloody, but he didn't seem to notice. "He's going to destroy us," Jonas said. "One way or another, he's going to destroy us." "No." Lydia's voice was steel. "He's not, because this time I know exactly how to fight him." Jonas turned to her. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth. The real truth, not the version he's trying to spin." Lydia's mind was racing, putting pieces together. "Hargrove wants to claim our marriage is fake? Then we prove it's real. We show everyone exactly who we are and what we've built." "How?" Lydia smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "We tell our story, all of it. The rejection, the struggle, the fire, the rebuilding. We make sure everyone in this territory knows exactly what Silas Hargrove is willing to do to steal land, and we make sure they know what we're willing to do to protect our family." Jonas stared at her, understanding dawning. "You want to go public, make this about more than just legal arguments." "I want to make this about truth versus power, heart versus greed, family versus—" She gestured at the half-built house around them. "Whatever Hargrove is. It's risky. Everything worth having is risky." Lydia moved closer, taking his bruised hands in hers. "We've already survived the worst he could throw at us. Fire, loss, legal attacks. We're still standing, still together. That's the story that matters." Jonas pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "How did I ever think I could do this alone?" "You couldn't. Nobody can. That's the point." Lydia pulled back to look at him. "So do we fight?" "We fight," Jonas agreed, "together." And as the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, Lydia felt something settle deep in her bones. Not peace exactly, but determination. Hargrove had made a mistake. He'd thought burning their house would break them. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger than they'd been before. They were no longer a rejected bride and a grieving widower trying to survive. They were a family. They were fighters. And they were done running. The next morning, Lydia sat down at the makeshift table in their half-finished kitchen and began to write. Not a legal document or a formal complaint, but a letter, simple, honest, and devastating in its truth. To the citizens of Willow Ridge and beyond, she wrote, her hands steady despite the enormity of what she was doing. My name is Lydia Harrow Caldwell. 4 months ago, I traveled from Philadelphia as a mail-order bride, only to be rejected upon arrival because I cannot bear children. I share this intimate detail not for sympathy, but for truth. What happened next is a story about what family really means, and what one man is willing to destroy to feed his greed. She wrote for hours, pausing only when her hand cramped or when emotion threatened to blur the words. She wrote about arriving in Montana full of hope and shame, about Jonas's quiet offer that saved her life, about 3 motherless children who taught her that love wasn't about blood or biology, but choice. She wrote about Teddy's coughing fits, and Mira's walls crumbling, and Hazel's desperate need for a mother's touch. And then she wrote about Hargrove, about the threats, the legal maneuvering, the fire that nearly killed them all. She didn't speculate or accuse directly. She didn't need to. She simply laid out facts, dates, and consequences, letting readers draw their own conclusions. Some will say our marriage is convenient, she wrote in closing. They're right. It's convenient to have someone who'll hold you when grief threatens to drown you. Convenient to have someone who'll stand beside you when bullies come calling. Convenient to build a family on foundation of mutual respect and growing love rather than just passion that fades. If that's fraud, then I'm guilty. But I call it survival. I call it courage. I call it choosing life over surrender. She signed it simply. Lydia Caldwell, wife and mother. Jonas read it that evening, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set the pages down carefully as if they might shatter. You're going to make enemies, he said finally. I already have enemies. Now I'm making sure everyone knows who they are. Hargrove will retaliate. This will make everything worse before it gets better. I know. Lydia met his eyes. Do you trust me? Jonas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lamplight. Then he picked up the pages and read them again, more slowly this time. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. Every word of this is true, he said. Every single word. And yes, I trust you. Completely. They made copies, laboriously, painfully, Lydia's hand cramping as she reproduced the letter over and over. Then they distributed them everywhere, the general store, the church, the saloon, the boarding house. They sent copies to neighboring towns, to the territorial newspaper, to anyone who would read them. The response was immediate and explosive. Some people praised Lydia's courage. Others called her shameless for airing private matters publicly. The territorial newspaper reprinted the letter in full, adding an editorial questioning Hargrove's business practices. Suddenly, what had been a local land dispute became something bigger, a story about power and family, about who got to decide what made a marriage legitimate. The women of Willow Ridge, in particular, rallied. They'd watched Lydia arrive alone and scared. They'd seen her teaching the children, nursing Teddy, standing beside Jonas. They knew a real wife when they saw one, paperwork be damned. That letter spoke truth, Mrs. Henderson said loudly in the general store, making sure everyone heard. I've been married 40 years and I've never seen a more devoted mother than Lydia Caldwell. Any man who claims that's fraud is blind or stupid or both. Others echoed the sentiment. By the time the hearing arrived 2 weeks later, public opinion had shifted dramatically. People who'd been afraid to oppose Hargrove publicly were now openly critical. His business suffered. His reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, began to crumble. But Hargrove wasn't done fighting. The hearing was packed, standing room only, with people spilling out into the street. Judge Morrison looked tired before the proceedings even began, as if he knew this would be ugly. Hargrove's lawyers went first, and they were vicious. They painted Lydia as a conniving woman who'd manipulated a grieving widower for her own gain. They suggested Jonas had been too weak with grief to see clearly, that he'd been seduced by a pretty face and false sympathy. They brought up her infertility repeatedly, suggesting it proved she was damaged goods trying to trap a man any way she could. Lydia sat through it with her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, though each word felt like a knife. Jonas's hand found hers under the table, squeezing so hard it hurt, and she squeezed back just as fiercely. Then it was their turn. Reverend Thomas testified first, describing the marriage ceremony, the clear commitment between Jonas and Lydia. "I've performed 100 weddings," he said. "Some were business arrangements, some were passionate but shallow. The Caldwell marriage is built on something stronger than either. It's built on respect, partnership, and genuine affection. Anyone with eyes can see it." Mrs. Henderson testified about watching Lydia with the children, about the clear bond between them. Old Pete Martinez testified about the fire, about finding evidence of arson, about his belief that Hargrove was behind it, though he couldn't legally prove it. And then Lydia stood to speak. The courtroom went silent, every eye fixed on her as she moved to stand before Judge Morrison, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "Your Honor, I won't claim our marriage is conventional," she began. "It's not. I came here as a mail-order bride and was rejected, rightfully so, by a man who wanted more children and I couldn't provide them. That rejection could have broken me. Instead, it led me to something better." She turned to face the courtroom, making sure everyone could hear. "I fell in love with 3 children who needed a mother more than I needed to feel sorry for myself. I fell in love with a man who showed me that strength isn't about never feeling pain. It's about feeling it and choosing to keep going anyway. I fell in love with land that tried to kill me, with winters that froze my bones, with a life that was harder than anything I'd known in Philadelphia." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Mr. Hargrove's lawyers want you to believe I'm a fraud because our marriage didn't start with romance. But I ask you, what's more fraudulent? A marriage that grows from respect and partnership into genuine love? Or a marriage that starts with passion and fades into resentment when times get hard? What's more real? Vows spoken because you're desperate and alone? Or vows that are proven every single day through action and choice?" She looked directly at Hargrove, who sat stone-faced at his table. "I choose this family every day. I chose them when I could have gone back to Philadelphia. I chose them when standing beside Jonas meant making an enemy of a powerful man. I chose them when our house burned down and we had nothing but each other and the clothes on our backs. I chose them this morning when I woke up in a half-built house with winter wind cutting through the walls, and I'll choose them tomorrow and every day after that." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavered. "So yes, Your Honor, our marriage was convenient. But convenient doesn't mean fake. It means necessary. It means survival. It means taking broken pieces and building something beautiful from the wreckage. And if that's not real, then I don't know what is." She sat down to absolute silence. Then someone in the back started clapping, a single person at first, then another, then more, until half the courtroom was applauding. Judge Morrison banged his gavel, but he was smiling. "Order," he called, but there was no real anger in it. "Order in the court." When silence finally returned, Morrison looked at Hargrove. "Silas, I'm going to be blunt. This is the most ridiculous waste of court time I've seen in 30 years on the bench. The Caldwell's marriage is legally sound. They were married by a minister, with witnesses, following all proper procedures. Whether their feelings at the time were romantic or practical is none of this court's business, and frankly, none of yours either." "But, Your Honor," Hargrove's lead lawyer tried to interrupt. "I'm not finished." Morrison's voice went hard. "Furthermore, there are some very serious questions about the fire that destroyed the Caldwell property. Questions about arson, about attempted murder. The sheriff is investigating, and I suggest you hope those investigations don't lead anywhere near you, Silas, because attempted murder is a hanging offense in this territory." Hargrove's face went white. "The charges are dismissed," Morrison continued. "The marriage stands, the original land ruling stands. And Silas?" He leaned forward. "I'd suggest you leave the Caldwells alone from now on. You've lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left." The gavel came down with finality, and it was over. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Some cheering, some arguing, Hargrove's lawyers clustering around him in furious consultation. Lydia sat frozen, unable to quite believe it was really finished. Then Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she heard him whisper against her hair, "It's over. God, Lydia, it's really over." The children mobbed them both, Hazel crying, Teddy laughing, Mira trying to look dignified, but failing as tears streaked her face. They stood there in the middle of the courthouse, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, by survival, by love that had been tested and proven real. But as they filed out into the spring sunshine, because somehow, impossibly, it was March now, and the worst of winter was behind them, Lydia saw Hargrove standing by his horse. Their eyes met across the crowded street, and what she saw in his expression wasn't defeat. It was cold, calculating hatred. "He's not done," she murmured to Jonas. "I know, but we are." Jonas's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Whatever he tries next, we'll face it, together." They rode home as a family, the children chattering excitedly in the wagon bed, spring mud sucking at the wheels. The half-finished house came into view, looking small and rough compared to what they'd lost, but beautiful in its own way. "It's not much," Jonas said, helping Lydia down from the wagon. "It's everything," she corrected. "It's ours." That night they celebrated with a modest supper and let the children stay up late, too excited to sleep anyway. Hazel insisted on showing Lydia every corner of the new house, even the parts that were still just framed walls. "This will be the kitchen," she announced, standing in what was currently a dirt floor between wooden beams. "And Mama will make gingerbread here, and we'll eat breakfast right there, and—" "How do you know what I'll make?" Lydia teased gently. Hazel looked at her with 5-year-old seriousness. "Because you're Mama. That's what mamas do." Later, after the children were finally asleep in their makeshift bedroom, Jonas found Lydia standing outside, looking up at the stars. The night was cold, but not brutal, spring cold, the kind that promised warmth was coming. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "About 4 months ago, when I stepped off that stage, I thought my life was over. I thought being rejected, being barren, meant I was broken. Useless." She leaned into his warmth. "I was so wrong." "You were never broken," Jonas said firmly. "You were just looking in the wrong place for wholeness." "So were you." He smiled against her hair. "Fair point." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, an owl hunting, the creek running fast with snowmelt. "The house should be finished in another month," Jonas said. "Walls, roof, proper floors, won't be fancy. I don't want fancy. I want home." "You have that." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You've had that since the moment you decided to stay. Since you stood on the porch with Hazel's broken doll and looked at me like I was crazy for trying to push you away. You were crazy. You all were. Taking in a stranger, trusting her with your children, your home." "Our home," Jonas corrected. "This was always going to be our home. I think I knew it the first time I saw you with Teddy, breathing him through that coughing attack like you'd been his mother all along. You just fit, like Sarah left a space exactly your shape, waiting for you to fill it." Lydia's eyes burned with tears. "Do you think she'd approve of us?" "I think Sarah would have loved you," Jonas said without hesitation. "She'd have loved how you fight for our children, how you stood up to Hargrove when I was ready to give up, how you rebuilt this family from ashes, literally." He cupped her face in his hands. "I think she'd be grateful you loved us when we needed it most." "I do love you," Lydia whispered. "All of you. More than I knew it was possible to love." "Good." Jonas kissed her softly. "Because you're stuck with us now. For better or worse, remember?" "For better or worse," Lydia agreed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The next weeks brought spring in earnest, mud and rain and green shoots pushing through the earth. The house took shape around them, and Lydia threw herself into making it a home. She sewed curtains from donated fabric. She planted a garden where Sarah's had been, using seeds saved from before the fire. She taught the children their lessons in the morning and worked alongside Jonas in the afternoon, learning the rhythm of ranch life. And slowly, quietly, something else began to happen. The other ranchers, emboldened by Hargrove's defeat, started standing up to him in small ways, refused his lowball offers for their land, challenged his claims to water rights, banded together to share resources and labor, making each other stronger. Hargrove's empire, built on fear and isolation, began to crumble. He still had money and influence, but people weren't afraid anymore. The Caldwells had proven that standing up to him was possible, that survival was possible, that family and determination could outlast greed and power. One morning in late April, Sheriff Daniels rode out to the ranch with news that made Jonas's face go hard with satisfaction. "We got him," the sheriff said. "Hargrove. Found a hired hand willing to testify that Silas paid him to set the fire. Kid's conscience got to him, I guess. He's willing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Will it stick?" Lydia asked, her heart racing. "Should. We've got testimony, we've got evidence from the fire site, we've got motive. Hargrove's lawyers will fight it, but—" The sheriff smiled grimly. "He's going to prison, Jonas. 5 years minimum for arson and attempted murder." Jonas sat down heavily, as if his legs had given out. "It's really over." "It's really over," the sheriff confirmed. "Thought you'd want to know." After he left, Jonas and Lydia stood in their nearly completed kitchen. Proper walls now, proper floors, proper windows that let in the spring sunshine, and held each other. "We did it," Lydia whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jonas corrected. "That letter you wrote, the way you fought in court, that's what turned everything around." "We did it together," Lydia insisted. "That's the whole point. Together." The trial happened in early May, and it was swift. The hired hand's testimony was damning, and physical evidence corroborated every detail. Hargrove's lawyers tried everything, but the judge, a territorial judge brought in specifically because Morrison was too close to the case, was unmoved. 5 years hard labor, he pronounced, and forfeiture of all property acquired through intimidation or fraud, to be determined by separate investigation. Hargrove's face was murderous as they led him away, but Lydia felt no satisfaction in his defeat. Just relief. Just the bone-deep knowledge that her family was finally truly safe. That night, the whole community gathered at the ranch for a celebration, part housewarming for the finished house, part victory party, part acknowledgement of everything they'd survived. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. The children ran wild in the spring evening, their laughter echoing across the valley. Lydia stood on the porch of her new home, their home, watching Jonas dance with Hazel, the little girl's feet on top of his boots. Mira and Teddy were attempting to teach old Pete's grandson how to skip stones in the creek. Around them, neighbors and friends ate and laughed and celebrated. "You look happy," Reverend Thomas said, coming to stand beside her. "I am happy," Lydia replied, and realized it was completely true. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. "That's grace," the Reverend said, "finding home in the last place you expected to look." "Or finding out that home isn't a place at all," Lydia added. "It's the people who choose to love you." "Especially that," the Reverend smiled. "You've built something beautiful here, Lydia. Not just the house, the family, the life. Sarah would be proud." "I hope so," Lydia said quietly. "I hope she knows her children are loved, that Jonas is happy again, that her legacy isn't just grief and loss. How could she not know? You honor her memory every day by loving the family she left behind." He patted her shoulder. "That's the best gift you could give her." As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Jonas found Lydia again, pulling her into a dance even though the fiddle had taken a break. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Dancing with my wife," he said, spinning her around. "Celebrating our life, thanking God and fate and whatever brought you to that stage station 4 months ago." 5 months, Lydia corrected. "It's been 5 months." "Has it? Feels like forever. Feels like yesterday." He pulled her close. "Feels like exactly the right amount of time." Over his shoulder, Lydia could see their children, Mira teaching Hazel a clapping game, Teddy showing off his stone-skipping technique. Their children. Not by birth, but by every choice that mattered. "I was thinking," Jonas said, his voice quiet beneath the party noise, "about what you said in court, about choosing us every day." "What about it?" "I choose you too. Every day, every moment, every breath." He stopped dancing, holding her face between his hands. "I choose this life we've built, this family, this woman who was brave enough to be rejected and stay anyway. who fought for us when I'd given up, who made me believe in second chances. Lydia's vision blurred with tears. Jonas, I love you, Lydia Caldwell, not conveniently, not practically, not because you saved my children or stood up to Hargrove or any of that. I love you because you're fierce and tender and stubborn and kind, because you make me want to be better than I am, because you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. I love you too, Lydia whispered, so much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that means something matters more than your own safety. She smiled through her tears. The kind that means you're alive. He kissed her then, right there in front of everyone, a kiss that tasted like joy and promise and home. Around them, people cheered and whistled, but Lydia barely heard them. She was too busy feeling the solid warmth of Jonas's arms, the press of her children clustering around them for a family embrace, the rightness of this moment she'd never dared dream of. Later, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Lydia stood in what would be Hazel's room, watching the little girl sleep. The room wasn't finished yet. No paint on the walls, no curtains on the windows, but it was safe and warm and theirs. She asked me today if she could call you Mama, Jonas said softly from the doorway. Not Miss Harrow, not Miss Lydia, just Mama. What did you tell her? I told her she'd have to ask you. Lydia's throat closed up. And if I say yes? Then Mira and Teddy will want the same. Then you'll officially be what you've been all along, their mother. Jonas moved closer. Is that what you want? Lydia thought about arriving in Montana 5 months ago, rejected and alone, convinced she was broken because she couldn't bear children. She thought about 3 motherless children who'd taught her that family wasn't about biology or blood, but about showing up every day and choosing love over fear. Yes, she said simply. That's exactly what I want. Then it's settled. You're Mama now, officially and forever. That night, lying in their bed in their new home with Jonas's arm around her waist and the sound of their children breathing in the next room, Lydia felt something she'd never felt before. Complete. Not perfect, because perfection was impossible and overrated, but complete. Whole. Enough. She'd come to Montana as damaged goods, a mail-order bride no one wanted. She'd been rejected for something she couldn't control, couldn't fix, couldn't change. But that rejection had led her here, to this man who'd learned to love again, to these children who'd needed her as much as she needed them, to this life that was harder and more beautiful than anything she'd left behind. She'd been rejected for being barren, but she'd never been barren at all. She'd just been waiting for the right family to nurture, one that needed a mother's heart more than a mother's womb. In the darkness, Jonas stirred, pulling her closer. You awake? He murmured. Just thinking. About what? About how sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. How being rejected was the best thing that ever happened to me. Jonas chuckled. Should I be insulted? You know what I mean. If you'd accepted me that first day, we would have married out of obligation, built a life on duty instead of choice. I wouldn't have had time to fall in love with your children. You wouldn't have had time to see me as anything but a solution to a problem. So you're saying rejection made us stronger? I'm saying rejection made us real. She turned in his arms to face him. We chose each other. Not because we had to. Because we wanted to. That's worth everything. You're worth everything, Jonas corrected, kissing her forehead. And I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to stay. Spring turned to summer and the ranch thrived. The garden Lydia had planted flourished, producing vegetables they sold in town for actual profit. The cattle herd grew. Teddy's cough disappeared entirely with the warm weather, and he grew 3 inches seemingly overnight. Mira started writing poetry, beautiful, haunting verses about Montana and family and survival. Hazel called Lydia Mama constantly, as if making up for lost time. And Jonas smiled, really smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and stayed there, transforming his whole face. They had problems, of course. Money was tight. The work was endless. Some nights Lydia fell into bed so exhausted she couldn't remember her own name. They argued sometimes, about discipline, about spending, about whose turn it was to muck out the stables. But they were happy. Bone-deep, soul-satisfied happy in a way Lydia had never imagined possible. One August evening, she sat on the porch with Jonas, watching the children play in the creek, their laughter carrying on the summer wind. "You know what I realized?" she said. "What's that?" "I spent 27 years thinking I was incomplete, thinking something was wrong with me because I couldn't have children. But I wasn't incomplete. I was just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For this, for them." She gestured at Mira, showing Teddy how to catch minnows, at Hazel splashing in the shallows. "For a family that needed me exactly as I am, not who I thought I should be. Just me." Jonas took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You saved us, you know. All of us. We were drowning in grief, going through motions, barely surviving. You gave us a reason to live again." "You saved me too," Lydia said. "You just don't realize it." "How?" "By seeing me. Not as damaged or broken or second best. Just as Lydia. As someone worth choosing. Worth fighting for. Worth loving." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching the sun paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and purple and pink. And Lydia thought about that terrified woman who'd stepped off the stage 5 months ago, certain her life was over. That woman had been so wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. She'd come to Montana searching for acceptance, for a place to belong, for someone to want her despite her flaws. Instead, she'd found something infinitely better. She'd found family, she'd found purpose. She'd found herself. And she'd learned that sometimes the best answer to your prayers is the one you never expected. That sometimes what looks like rejection is really redirection. That sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you're born into. "Mama, Papa," Hazel's voice rang out across the valley. "Come play with us." "Should we?" Jonas asked, already standing. "Absolutely," Lydia said, taking his hand. They ran down to the creek together, and their children's joy surrounded them like sunshine. Mira splashed water at Jonas. Teddy tried to dump a bucket over Lydia's head. Hazel shrieked with laughter as Jonas lifted her onto his shoulders. And Lydia laughed, really laughed. The kind of laugh that came from deep in her belly, that made her ribs hurt, that felt like pure happiness made audible. She was home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. Not in a place, though the Montana ranch had become dear to her. Not in a role, though being wife and mother filled her with purpose. Home in herself. Home in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people who needed her, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The mail-order bride who'd been rejected for being barren had found her family at last. And that family, built on choice and courage and stubborn, determined love, was the greatest gift she'd ever received. As twilight settled over the valley and they walked back to the house together, children chattering and Jonas's hand warm in hers, Lydia sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for the rejection that led me here. Thank you for the courage to stay when leaving would have been easier. Thank you for this man who learned to love again. Thank you for these children who taught me that family isn't about blood or biology, but about showing up every day and choosing love. Thank you for second chances, for new beginnings, for the beautiful, impossible miracle of finding home in the last place you expected to look." And as the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, lighting up the vast Montana sky, Lydia Caldwell walked into her house with her family, closed the door on the past, and stepped fully into the future she'd built with her own 2 hands and a heart that refused to give up. She'd been rejected for being incomplete. But she'd never been incomplete at all. She'd simply been waiting for the family who would choose her to complete their home. And now, at last, she was exactly where she belonged. Home.